It was supposed to be a normal lunch hour at Luby's cafeteria in Killeen, Texas. The restaurant was packed with around 150 people. There were coworkers, families, and retired workers all gathered in the bright dining room for a casual midday meal. Then, at 12:39 p.m., the glass wall of the restaurant exploded inward. A blue Ford Ranger pickup had crashed straight into the dining area, slamming into people at tables as it tore through the building. For a split second, people were in shock, thinking it was some terrible accident. But before anyone could react, the driver raised a handgun and began firing. He caught everyone off guard. But the nightmare was only beginning. Within minutes, the massacre would turn regular lunchgoers into either victims who never made it home or desperate survivors fighting with everything they had to protect themselves and anyone they could reach. Welcome back to Crime A to Z, where we detail cases and criminals from their very beginning until well after other reporting ends. Today, we're covering the Luby's massacre, a case that changed the way America thought about public safety forever. It was a mass shooting that struck without warning inside an ordinary restaurant on an ordinary afternoon. The play-by-play was heart-crushing. In the minutes that followed, a Texas town would become the site of the deadliest mass shooting up until that time, a tragedy that helped open the door to America's bloody future of mass killings. Before we dive in, we want to say a quick thank you. This case easily ranks as one of our most requested. Thank you to everyone who recommended it. And a special heartfelt thank you to our good friend, Natty, who stayed on us until we finally marched this case to the front of the line. Let's go. There was a typical lunch rush at the Luby's cafeteria in Killeen, Texas, a mid-sized town of about 50,000 residents at the time. Pastor Kirby Lack had been enjoying lunch with his longtime friend, Dr. Michael Griffith, a local veterinarian. They were sitting at a small two-person table by the south-facing windows. The two had been talking about life, faith, and even joking darkly about who might attend their funerals someday. That's when Kirby heard it. The unmistakable screech of tires outside. The pickup came to a halting stop near the cash registers. 32-year-old Dr. Susanna Gracia Hupp recalled that the stop was so abrupt, she noticed how it bounced back on its shock absorbers after it stopped. She had come to Luby's with her parents, Al and Ursula Gracia, after initially turning them down for lunch that day. Her chiropractic clinic had been packed with patients, but when she received a call from her Luby's manager friend Mark Copenhaff, inviting her to come have lunch at the restaurant as well, she conceded. As she stood next to the truck trying to process what was happening, she noticed that it had slammed through the very spot where she and her parents would have usually sat. They had not sat there that day because there had already been someone seated there. In the mayhem, people were screaming and groaning in pain. Most everyone assumed the crash was an accident and immediately began helping those who were hit or thrown. A group of Killeen Independent School District employees were there that day celebrating Boss's Day, including Mary Roberts.
We had gone there for Boss's Day to honor our boss, who's a great guy. And we were just finishing lunch, giving him some gifts from all of us. And the truck came crashing through. And my original reaction was the guy lost his brakes. What an embarrassing situation. And just kind of stood there watching to see what he would do.
Near in the shattered front windows laid elderly couple James and Lula Welsh, both 75 years old. They had been struck during the truck's violent entry. Michael and Kirby, who were sitting nearby, rushed to comfort the couple, but they wouldn't be able to stay with them long. Not with what was about to unfold. Both Susanna and Kirby moved toward the truck. A 33-year-old local Walmart employee named Thomas Simmons also approached the vehicle. Thomas had managed to get out of the way of the incoming truck, and now he rushed to check on the driver. The driver's side window was already rolled down. As Thomas reached for the driver's door handle, the driver raised a 9mm Glock 17 semi-automatic, pointed it straight at Thomas, and shot him. Thomas fell to his knees and covered his face. Then the driver shot him 3 more times. Thomas collapsed onto his back.
When he got out of the truck, And I really am not familiar with guns, so there was a gunshot, but it still didn't register with me because I'm not a gun person. And somebody, I believe it was my boss, but it could have been someone else, said, "Hit the floor now." So I did.
We heard this crash and saw the pickup come through, and we thought he'd had a heart attack or his brakes had failed him or something. And then he started shooting out the window. Well, we knew something's up.
The restaurant went silent. Both Susanna and Kirby froze. Someone screamed and people began running for cover. Some hid under tables or tipped them over and used them as barriers. Others scrambled for whatever cover they could find. For some, it ultimately would not do any good.
When he came out the door and started shooting, somebody hollered, "Get under the table," and that's where all we got. All of us jumped under the tables. But he was going along there, they said, turning tables over, shooting some of them, even turned the tables over.
At a table a short distance away, retirees Barbara Knight and 62-year-old Kitty Davis were sipping coffee. Kitty had been showing off pictures of her baby grandchild just moments before. When the truck crashed in, Barbara stood up in a panic, convinced the truck might explode. Kitty grabbed her and yanked her back down, warning her that the man had a gun. Still seated behind the wheel, the driver spotted Louis Caraballo, another local Walmart employee who had been there for lunch with Thomas. Louis had been struck by the truck when it had crashed through the window, so he was lying nearby, injured. The driver reached out of the truck and shot Louis. Despite being both hit and shot, Louis would survive his injuries. The driver then began shooting toward the west wall of the restaurant where Dee Leisure and Glenn Spivey were sitting. A bullet grazed Dee's cheek. Once both of them realized she had been shot, the pair rushed for cover down a walkway leading to the kitchen. When they started hearing more shots, they dropped to the floor, with Glenn using his body to shield Dee. The driver had climbed out of the truck. It was 6'1", 140-pound George Hennard. Normally a fairly handsome man, his expression was deranged. He continued shooting anyone he encountered at close range, shouting things like, "This is for the women of Belton. This is for what Bell County did to me and my family. This is payback. Was it worth it?"
When he started with the women comments, I kind of thought he was after women only, or that his wife was in there or something and they had had a fight and he was after her, looking for her or something like that. But when he kept going around, it was obvious it wasn't just a person he was after.
As the shots rang out, Kirby dove beneath a table alongside Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Charles Doty and 29-year-old John Romero Jr. Stephen was a 43-year-old Vietnam War veteran stationed at Fort Hood. He was set to retire in just 2 weeks. Nearby, Hennard turned toward a group of Colleen School District employees. He shot James Swift, a school district administrator, in the foot. At the same table, Susan Hester, a counselor with KISD, squeezed her eyes shut and began to pray silently. Her co-worker, Mary Roberts, kept her eyes wide open.
At the time, I couldn't close my eyes. I felt like if I did, I was a goner. So I just kept them open.
James, Susan, and Mary would all survive. Hennard then shot Olgica Taylor in the leg. Olgica, a Yugoslavian immigrant, was there with her daughter Annika McNeil and her 3-year-old granddaughter Lakeisha. While Hennard would turn his attention away from them briefly, he would return a few moments later to carry out one of the most heartbreaking betrayals of the entire rampage. But in the meantime, Hennard moved toward a planter in the center of the restaurant. The large planter connected 4 wooden lattice walls, forming what looked like a plus symbol. Just northwest of it, the Hennehan family were still sitting at a table. Bernard and Venice Hennehan were sitting with their backs to the north lattice. Bernard and Venice had traveled from Missouri to attend their granddaughter's upcoming wedding in Houston. They were sitting with their daughter Judy, her husband Stephen Ernst, and 2 close family friends. Hennard fired through a gap in the lattice. The first shot struck Stephen in the stomach. A second round passed through Judy's arm and continued into her mother, Venice, killing Venice instantly. Stephen clutched his abdomen, blood soaking into his shirt. Bernard and the others at their table were not injured. Not far from the planter, retirees Barbara Knight and Kitty Davis, who had earlier ducked under their table, were spotted by Hennard. His next bullet tore into Barbara's ankle and severed 3 of Kitty's fingers as it exited. Barbara stayed frozen, refusing to move or flinch. From where she lay, she could only see the shooter from his waist to his shoes. Just a few feet away, James Gillette and his pregnant wife, Celia, were lying side by side. James was trying to keep track of the gunman's movements, waiting for the right moment to possibly jump him. Celia warned him in a panicked whisper, telling him to quit moving, that the man might kill him if he didn't stop. She too could only see Hennard's lower body, but she saw him point the gun downward at someone, and without thinking, Celia began reciting the Lord's Prayer out loud. James and Celia would both survive. Still crouched under the table with Kirby Lack and Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Doty, 29-year-old John Romero Jr. attempted to shift his position or possibly escape. Kirby saw John get up on his knees, and right then, Hennard turned. Kirby had no idea what John was doing, but the shot came fast. John was shot in the chest, and he collapsed backward. Stephen and Kirby moved closer to him as his white shirt became soaked with blood. His breathing grew shallow. He didn't speak. He simply crossed his legs and drifted into unconsciousness as his eyes fluttered. Hennard was armed with 2 semi-automatic pistols, a Glock 17 and a Ruger P89. He moved through the cafeteria, firing calmly but swiftly. His targets were not always predictable. Some shots seemed random, but others were deliberate. He was both erratic and methodical at the same time. People were going down fast. It was during this chaos that Dr. Michael Griffith, the veterinarian who had joined Kirby for lunch, was hit by 2 bullets. One struck his leg, the other his chest. Michael slid back against the wall, trying to brace himself. He tried to get up, but his body was giving out. He collapsed. Beside him lay James and Lula Welsh, the elderly couple that Michael and Kirby had comforted just after they were run over by the truck. Hennard shot the couple where they lay. As the top of Hennard's weapon snapped back and locked open, the way semi-automatics do when they are empty, Kirby saw his chance. He rose from where he had been hiding and grabbed a rolling chair. His mind raced through possibilities. Throw it, charge him, make a break for the back. But just as quickly, the sound of metal stopped him cold. From under the table nearby, Lieutenant Colonel Doty peeked out and shouted that Hennard was reloading. Hennard had dropped the empty magazine and was pulling another from his shirt pocket when he noticed movement. He turned toward Kirby's table and shot Stephen Doty in the chest, killing him. Kirby was hit next. A bullet struck his upper back and tore into his abdomen. Then Hennard shouted, "The women of Belton and Colleen are vipers." He spun around and opened fire again as he moved toward the planter. A barrage of bullets smashed into a table. Dishes and glass shattered, raining down just inches from where Barbara Knight was lying. He kept moving and shot Kitty Davis 3 times in the back. Then, he shifted toward the southeast section of the dining room. There, crouched beneath a table, were 2 employees from TU Electric, 33-year-old Deborah Gray and 36-year-old Suzanne Rashat. Hennard bent down, aimed, and executed both women, shooting them in their heads at close range. As Hennard continued circling the restaurant, he returned to the table of KISD employees. 56-year-old Ruth Pujol was now in his line of fire. He shot and killed her. Nancy Stansbury was a supervisor for KISD. Hennard showed her no mercy either. He shot and killed her as well. As the rampage continued, people either whispered prayers, cried softly, or stayed silent, terrified. Toward the back of the restaurant, 51-year-old Betty Lou Cooper and her daughter, Jody Raspberry, saw their chance. While Hennard was attacking victims in the southern end, the 2 crawled across the floor and slipped into the women's restroom. Once inside, they used their own bodies to barricade the door and waited, listening. The shooting continued. 64-year-old Temple, Texas resident Juanita Williams had several rounds fired into her stomach. She died from her wounds. Sylvia King, a 30-year-old beauty store owner, had been having lunch alone there that day. Hennard shot and killed her. She would later be found beside Jimmy Carruthers, also killed. While the chaos continued in the dining area, many of the staff were able to escape through the kitchen via an emergency exit. But not all of the employees were able to reach that escape route, so they sought other cover. Mark Matthews, just 17 years old, crawled into the industrial dishwasher to hide. Maria Serna ran into the walk-in refrigerator, stacking a crate of milk cartons in front of her for cover. From inside the refrigerator, she could still hear the gunfire in the dining room. As Hennard moved westward across the dining area, he spotted 44-year-old Glenn Spivey and Dee Leisure. Just moments earlier, Dee had grabbed one of the gray plastic bins used for dirty dishes and placed it over her head, hoping it might hide her blonde hair. She feared it would make her stand out. Hennard drew closer. Glenn was now lying across Dee's body, shielding her completely. Hennard fired, and Glenn collapsed. Dee could feel his body go limp, and she whispered for her friend to hold on, trying to keep him alive. Still lying face down on the carpet, she inched out from under him and saw the truth. Glenn had been hit directly in the forehead. Glenn took one final breath, and Dee tried to pull herself together. She glanced toward the planter, where she saw an elderly woman trembling in fear. Desperate for human contact, she crawled toward the stranger. Hennard fired again. This time, Dee felt it. Sharp, searing pain tore through her thigh. But she kept moving. She reached the woman and held onto her. Hennard shouted at them, asking them whether it was worth it. The women screamed no, as they held onto each other. From her spot behind a table, Susanna Gracia Hupp peeked out to get a look at the shooter. In the first few moments of the massacre, she tried to make sense of it all, trying to figure out some sort of motive. He had not asked for money, so it did not appear to be a robbery. It could not be a hit, since he was executing everyone he encountered. He was returning to her area. She was gripped with fear until she suddenly remembered that she had a weapon of her own. But almost as soon as she thought of it, she also remembered that it was no longer in her purse. At the time, it was illegal to carry a concealed weapon in Texas. So even though she had a Smith & Wesson .38 revolver, she had left it in her car to comply with the law. Then her father, Al Gracia, caught her eye. He felt like he had to do something. Otherwise, everyone in that room was going to die. Susanna tried to stop him, begging him to stay down. But Al saw what looked like an opening. He stood and charged, determined to stop the gunman. Hennard was about 15 feet away. Al made it halfway before Hennard shot him in the chest. The 71-year-old World War II veteran collapsed. He was still breathing when he hit the floor, but Susanna saw the wound. She knew he was not going to make it. But Al's bravery changed the trajectory of the attack. Instead of coming toward Susanne's table, Hennard veered left. A new wave of gunfire reached the KISD employee's table. A shot tore through the air, so close to Maria Burroughs, her senses were stunned. When her vision refocused, Pat Carney was dead beside her. Hennard moved toward the serving line, where several people were lying face down, completely exposed. Unlike those in the dining room, people in the serving line had no furniture or tables to use as barriers or hide behind. George Osborne covered his wife Ethel, physically shielding her, even placing his hand over her eyes so that she wouldn't have to witness the horror unfolding around them. As the gunman drew closer, the couple held their breath. Then, a single shot rang out. It struck Claudine Humphrey, just inches from them. She died instantly. The bullet passed so close to George that he could feel its heat. But both he and Ethel survived. A short distance from the serving line stood a group of waiting benches. Those who were able to ducked behind or crawled beneath them, desperate for cover. Behind one of them, Connie Miller and Roxanne Peters crouched in fear. Hennard spotted them. Roxanne refused to lift her head. Hennard sneered something at her, mocking her for trying to hide. Then, he shot Connie in the back of the head. Roxanne could feel her friend's body jolt, but she still couldn't look. Hennard moved on without shooting Roxanne. Several other people were hiding beneath the benches. Hennard fired a shot, striking Reverend Shannon McMullen in the leg. He aimed beneath another bench and killed Zona May Lin, shooting her where she lay. Hennard kept moving. Eventually, he reached the spot where Charlene Smith was crouching. She braced for the worst, but nothing came. His second gun, the Ruger P-89, had run out of ammunition. Instead of reloading it, Hennard placed the pistol on top of a food tray and left it there. After leaving the serving line, Hennard turned and spotted Annika McNeil, who was clutching her 3-year-old daughter, Lakeisha. Earlier in the attack, he had shot Annika's mother, Algica Taylor, in the leg, a wound that left her incapacitated, but alive. The three of them had been huddled together when Hennard first approached, but he had moved on to other victims. It seemed like they had been spared, but now he was standing in front of them again. He looked at 3-year-old Lakeisha, then stepped to the side. "Get that kid out of here. I ain't killing no babies today," he said. Annika hesitated, unsure whether he was being sincere or simply toying with them. But Hennard growled again, more forcefully. "Run." Olgica, still on the floor and bleeding, gave her daughter a look of urgency. "Just go." Annika took off, holding on tight to Lakeisha, waiting for a bullet in the back that never came. She ran until she reached the location outside the restaurant where others had taken refuge. Back inside the restaurant, Olgica tried to stand, possibly trying to follow her daughter and granddaughter to safety. Hennard turned back and shot her in the face. What seemed like an act of mercy became a gut-wrenching betrayal. The wounded John Romero Jr. was still conscious, gripping his blood-soaked shirt, while Hennard began another loop through the dining room. Kirby Lack lay face down, trying not to move. The pain from the gunshot to his hip had gone away and was numb now, but the blood loss was significant. His only hope was to stay still enough for Hennard to pass him by unnoticed. He was still lying next to John Romero. The shooter saw that John was still breathing. He fired again, this time into John's chest. Then Hennard turned to Kirby. He bent down, straddling Kirby's back, then grabbed his hair, lifting his head off the carpet. Kirby closed his eyes. He could feel the gun press against the back of his head. He said a final prayer, waiting for the shot. Then, a sudden noise from across the room broke the moment. Hennard fired his gun, but he had jerked his aim at the last second. Kirby opened his eyes. The bullet had torn through the carpet, inches away from his face. The noise that saved Kirby's life came from the back of the restaurant. Tommy Vaughn had been trying to break open a window to escape. When kicking didn't work, Tommy braced himself. Hennard started heading toward them, but Tommy didn't look back. He knew if he did, he'd freeze. Instead, he hurled either his body or a chair through the window just as Hennard raised his weapon. His action created a critical escape route that several others would use to escape afterward.
When I got up, I never did look back because I knew if I did, he'd probably really shoot me then. Because they said if anybody looked at him or said anything, that's when he really shot. So when I went out the window, like I said, I cut my foot. Never did know it until like the bled to death before they got a tourniquet on it, but I didn't even know I'd cut it. I guess I was in shock or something.
Tommy Vaughn was later credited as saving around 20 lives. At 911 dispatch, the phones had been ringing off the hook, jamming them to the extent that family members calling to find out about their loved ones could not get through.
Police Department. Yes, this is the Cleveland Police Department. There's a shooting occurring over at Luby. We've already got someone on the way. Do you have a description of the person that's shooting? He's still shooting. Okay, so I need a description of him before my officers get there. One moment, please. Did you see him? Police Department. We've got somebody on the way, thank you. Police Department.
Ma'am, this is Mr. Reinhardt over at Star Outlets. I just had an employee of Luby's.
We've already got somebody on the way, sir. Thank you. Police Department. Yes, I have like to report there's a shooting at Luby's. We've already got somebody on the way, ma'am. Okay, thank you. He's driving the pickup. His pickup is still in the store. Okay. Police Department. Hi, I'm calling about, I heard people screaming over at Luby's. Yes, ma'am, that's why my phones are tied up. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Police Department. Yes, we got an emergency. Okay, ma'am, we're already on our way. Please, thank you. Sorry.
And the calls would continue coming in. Back inside, Susanna heard the sound of Tommy breaking through the window. Not sure what had happened, she peeked out and saw that people were escaping through the freshly broken window while Hennard was distracted. Susanna seized the moment. She pulled on her mother, Ursula, and dashed toward the shattered window. Once she made it outside, she realized she had escaped, but she also immediately realized that her mother had not followed her out. Her parents had just had their 47th wedding anniversary a couple of weeks prior to the shooting. Susanna said that it didn't occur to her when she was pulling on her mom to come with her that she was not going anywhere without her husband. Inside the dining room, Ursula crawled to her husband's side. Al was fading, slipping in and out of consciousness. Ursula didn't run. She stayed, kneeling beside him, cradling his head in her lap. That's when Hennard noticed them. He ignored the chaos near the broken window even as survivors sprinted through it to safety. He walked toward the elderly couple instead. Just then, a police officer reached the broken window. There had not been a clear description of the suspect, but he wouldn't need one. What he saw made it painfully clear. He saw a tall man pointing a weapon at two defenseless people. Ursula looked up at Hennard, then lowered her head toward Al. Hennard shot her. The officer flinched at the shot, but did not return fire. Too many innocent people were still in the line of fire. One wrong move could cost more lives. Ursula's final act of loyalty ended in tragedy, but it confirmed the identity of the gunman and gave others time to escape. Officers were now on the scene, but Hennard had no intentions of letting up.
It was at that point he was, I'm not good on distances, but I'd say 10 feet maybe from me when the police came barreling through that window. And I just let out all the air in my body and said, "My angels are here." And I knew it was going to be okay because he immediately turned and he was preoccupied with them. So I was no longer a target of any sort. And I truly believe that those policemen saved my life.
The barreling she was referring to was the police entering the building and engaging Hennard in a shootout. Officers from the Department of Public Safety happened to be next door at the Sheraton Hotel training local police on how to prevent auto theft. Around 12:40 p.m. during a break, they were outside when they heard glass shattering, followed by a muffled gunshot. Moments later, a woman came running toward them, screaming, "He's crazy. He's got a gun. He's killing everybody." The DPS officers, who were unarmed and in plainclothes at the time, sprinted to retrieve their weapons from their vehicles before heading straight for the cafeteria. Hennard was now the one under attack. He panicked, trying to reload. But in his rush, he tried to feed Ruger ammunition into his Glock 17. He cursed under his breath, scrambling to find the correct rounds. At that moment, Killeen police officers pushed inside through the curtains. One of them fired a shot, which hit Hennard in the arm.
I was basically coming back from a drug raid, and we just recovered about a pound of methamphetamine, heard the call go down, and we're in the immediate area. I drove my unmarked vehicle up into the parking lot and found out what was happening, and then saw the gunman, and then fired a shot at him, in which I hit him on my first shot from about 50 yards away. And then I entered the building because it didn't incapacitate him totally at that time. And I exchanged gunfire along with Al Morris. We exchanged gunfire with him, and then he finally ran low on bullets and committed suicide.
George Hennard was dead. Once he realized he was cornered, he aimed at his right temple and used one last bullet on himself. From the moment he crashed his truck through the glass until the last bullet was fired, just 12 minutes had passed. Once the officers announced everything was all clear, those who could still move began to stand and make their way towards safety. First responders flooded into the building, checking for anyone who might still have a pulse. Outside, news vans arrived, and the first images of America's deadliest shooting would soon be broadcast to the nation. With so many people wounded, the town called in the military for help. Doctors from Fort Hood soon joined the civilian paramedics, helping triage and stabilize survivors. Inside the restaurant, emergency responders found Barbara Knight and Kitty Davis. Barbara insisted they take Kitty first, explaining that she was more seriously hurt. Nearby, John Romero Jr. was barely clinging to life as emergency responders moved him toward the front of the restaurant. They did the same with Al Gracia after discovering that he had a faint pulse. Doctors and medics desperately worked to save the two men. But despite their efforts, neither survived.
I was there with my parents, and making a long story short, my father went at the guy because he felt like he had to do something. And he was shot in the chest. I was able to get out. My mother stayed with my father, and eventually Hennard got around to her. And so my brother and sister and I lost both our parents that day.
Excluding Hennard, 22 people were killed and 27 more were injured, many of them critically. It was the deadliest mass shooting in American history at the time. The restaurant floor was covered in overturned chairs, shattered glass, and the bodies of the fallen. Authorities closed the curtains to shield off the devastation and begin the daunting tasks ahead of them. Killeen had never seen anything like this. A mid-sized town of about 50,000 residents at the time, it was mostly known for being home to Fort Hood military base. So the local hospitals were overwhelmed. Family members who had heard about the shooting raced to the scene. The sheriff and hotel across the street from the restaurant served as a command post. People would come there, desperate to know whether their loved ones were among the survivors or among the dead. Lubys rented out 50 local La Quinta hotel rooms and made them available to family members of victims who came into town and needed a place to stay. People lined up to donate blood, even after officials announced that no more blood was needed because so few of the people who would need blood had survived. After a few hours and once the bodies were removed, police reopened the curtains. But the scene still clearly reflected the horror that had unfolded. There was a painstaking effort to document every item in the restaurant, right down to the placement of not just the bodies, but every table, every utensil, everything. Once they were done, they had the task of removing the vehicle from the restaurant, reversing it the same way it came in. In the days that followed, the town came together to mourn. Pictures of the victims filled the newspapers. Personal stories about the lives lost made the tragedy hit even harder. A press conference was held, and questions were answered as best anyone could. Some victims who attended the press conference felt that the tragedy was the McDonald's massacre happening all over again.
We had two witnesses that attended the press conference, and they said that their first thought was that this was another McDonald's incident. That was all they could think of was, oh my God, this is McDonald's.
Across the country, people struggled to comprehend how something as routine as lunch at Luby's could turn so deadly. Back then, mass shootings were not yet a part of the American vocabulary, not like they are today. So making sense of the massacre was new. And at the center of it all was one question: why would someone do this? George Joe Hennard was 35 years old at the time of the Luby's massacre. He lived alone in a trailer in Belton, Texas, 20 miles from Killeen. Neighbors and acquaintances described him as rude, angry, and withdrawn.
Neighbors in the small town where he lived, Belton, 12 miles east of here, paint a picture of Hennard as a very troubled man. They say he was aloof and his family was peculiar.
He seemed like he was by himself and he felt like everybody was against him.
Hennard did not have any close friends. Neighbors would call police to report him yelling in the middle of the night, possibly experiencing mental health crises. He frequently shouted at women in his neighborhood and seemed to believe they looked down on him.
He acted like he knew me. I never said a word, and he cussed me out and said, just keep pushing, okay, just keep pushing, but worse than that.
An ex-roommate recalled that Hennard often referred to women as snakes and made crude, hostile remarks about them, especially after arguments with his mother. Survivors later reported that during the shooting, Hennard appeared to deliberately target women, stepping over male patrons to execute females at point-blank range. Hennard had worked as a merchant marine, but was fired for drug use and poor performance. After losing his job, he drifted further into isolation. He spent his time writing angry letters, stockpiling weapons, and stewing over the belief that women and minorities were ruining America. Months before the attack, Hennard mailed 2 local women a long, disturbing letter expressing his disdain for women.
This summer, a neighbor of your daughter received a letter from the gunman. He enclosed photos of himself and an address in Nevada where he was temporarily living. Hennard suggested meeting the women.
The women barely knew him, but the letter made it clear that Hennard was obsessed with hatred. Hennard legally purchased the 2 weapons he used during the attack. On the morning of October 16, 1991, just hours before the massacre, Hennard was seen at a convenience store where he bought about $3 worth of snacks and said he'd return to pay later. Shortly afterward, he visited the same Luby's where the attack would later take place. He sat alone and left without incident, but witnesses later said something about him seemed off. He would return later that day, this time in his pickup truck, armed and ready to take out his resentment on strangers. Hennard's motives remain unclear, but his history of drug use and troubling behavior toward women may offer clues. With George Hennard making a permanent exit, there would be no trial. No chance for the families to face him in court. No answers from the person who caused so much pain. Cream Highland Kitty Davis became the final victim of the massacre when she passed away 3 days after the attack. She had been placed into a medically induced coma due to the extent of her injuries, including the loss of 3 fingers and severe trauma to her hand. Despite doctors' efforts, she never regained consciousness and passed away, bringing the death toll to 23, 24 including Henard. The most unexpected injury of the massacre came from Marie Sernam. She had not been shot or struck by the truck. Instead, she was treated for exposure after hiding in the restaurant's walk-in refrigerator for nearly 3 hours, unsure if it was safe to come out. For 19-year-old Luby's employee Mark Matthews, who ducked into the industrial dishwasher to evade the massacre, the ordeal lasted even longer. He stayed in the dishwasher for nearly 20 hours, worried the gunman might still be at large. Police found him the following morning, long after the scene had cleared. Many of those who made it out alive did so by seconds or inches.
When the first shot was fired, he hollers and says, "You bitch." And this is directly in front of me. And when that happened, his shell or projectile shell came out on my hand.
When he shot that lady next to you, what did you say to yourself?
I said, "Oh my God."
The gunman was just an arm's length away from the Fitzwaters, but he passed them.
In the aftermath of the massacre, some survivors turned their pain into action. One of the most vocal was Susanna Hupp, who lost both her parents. She became a Texas state representative and spent years pushing for stronger self-defense rights. At the time of the shooting, Texas made it difficult to legally carry a concealed handgun. Many survivors believe that if someone inside Luby's had been armed, things would have turned out very differently. Their efforts paid off, but Luby's was only the beginning. Over the next decade, a series of other mass shootings, including one on California Street in San Francisco in 1993, added pressure across the country. Together, the events pushed more states to adopt similar laws and helped shape the national conversation around guns, safety, and personal defense. By the early 2000s, every U.S. state had enacted some form of concealed carry law. And today, Texas has some of the least restrictive gun laws in the country. As the shock set in, Luby's, the city, and the community moved quickly to care for those left in the wake of the tragedy. A memorial trust fund was established for the families of the victims. Luby's Cafeteria made the first donation, contributing $10,000 to help begin the healing process. Luby's Incorporated also paid for each victim's funeral expenses. For the survivors, the physical wounds healed faster than the emotional ones. Many lived with severe PTSD. Loud noises, crowded spaces, or even a simple lunch outing could trigger flashbacks. Some survivors struggled for years with survivor's guilt, wondering why they had lived when so many others had not. The Luby's Cafeteria reopened 5 months after the tragedy, bolstered by overwhelming community support. 40 of the original 43 people who worked there during the massacre returned. The restaurant continued operations for nearly a decade before permanently closing on September 9, 2000. By 2006, the former Luby's building, where so many had lost their lives, had been converted into a Chinese buffet restaurant. Before Luby's, most Americans didn't think about mass shootings happening in everyday places. This massacre changed that. It forced the country to confront its new reality that violence wasn't confined to so-called bad neighborhoods or big cities. It could strike anywhere, in small towns, in ordinary places, on ordinary days. So while Luby's held the grim distinction of being the worst mass shooting in America up until that point, surpassing both the 1966 Tower shooting in Austin and the 1984 McDonald's massacre in San Ysidro, it would not stay that way. The shootings kept coming and got worse, even plaguing one of the country's most vulnerable institutions, schools. Luby's wasn't the first, but being the worst of its time, it cemented its place in America's disturbing new normal. It now stands as the 6th most deadly mass shooting in modern U.S. history as of the middle of 2025. We hope we honor the victims and survivors of this senseless tragedy. Let us know what you think about this case in the comments. And if you like how we presented this case, we'd really appreciate a quick like, subscribe, and share, please. Thanks for watching.